Have you ever witnessed the moment when pride crumbles before desperate need? When someone who once wielded power over you suddenly stands vulnerable at your doorstep, seeking what they once mocked? Today's story plunges into the raw territory of persecution and grace, where a young believer's faith becomes the very lifeline his persecutor desperately needs. What happens when the tables turn and forgiveness becomes not just a virtue, but the only bridge between life and death? The leather-bound Bible felt heavier than usual in Timothy Brennan's 17-year-old hands as he stood before Principal Victoria Harrington's imposing mahogany desk. Outside the office window, storm clouds gathered over Millbrook Academy, casting shadows across the diplomas and certificates that lined her walls like trophies of academic authority. The woman behind the desk, impeccably dressed in a charcoal business suit, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, regarded him with eyes that held no warmth, only the cold efficiency of someone about to execute a decision they had already made. "Mr. Brennan," she began, her manicured fingers drumming against a manila folder that Timothy knew contained his fate. "We've discussed this before. Your continued demonstrations of faith have become disruptive to our learning environment." Timothy's grip tightened on the worn Bible his grandmother had given him before she passed. The book's edges were soft from years of reading, its pages marked with notes in his grandmother's careful script. He could feel his heart pounding, but something deeper, something that felt like standing water in a storm, kept him steady. "I only answered Melissa's question about suffering, Principal Harrington. She asked me directly after her brother's accident. You provided religious counseling on school property," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp as winter ice. "Despite 3 written warnings about proselytizing. This is a secular institution, Mr. Brennan. We maintain strict neutrality on matters of faith." The irony wasn't lost on Timothy. The same hallways that hosted presentations on every ideology under the sun, from nihilism to hedonism in philosophy class, somehow couldn't tolerate a quiet conversation about hope. But he held his tongue. His father had taught him that battles weren't always won with words. Victoria stood, her 5'8" frame commanding despite Timothy's advantage of 3 inches. At 42, she had built her career on progressive educational reforms and prided herself on running what the state board called a model of inclusive, secular education. The small cross Timothy wore under his shirt felt like it was burning against his chest. "Your academic record is exemplary," she continued, moving to the window where the first drops of rain began to streak the glass. 4.0 GPA, captain of the debate team, volunteer work at the shelter. Which makes this all the more disappointing." She turned back to face him, and for a moment Timothy thought he saw something flicker in her green eyes. Regret? No, it was gone too quickly. "Effective immediately. You are expelled from Millbrook Academy." The words hung in the air like a judge's gavel. Timothy felt the floor seem to shift beneath him. His scholarship, his college applications, his future, everything he had worked for, crashed down in those 5 words. Yet even as his mind reeled, that same steady presence remained, like an anchor in churning seas. "I'll need your student ID," Victoria said, returning to her desk with practiced efficiency. Timothy reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the small wooden cross his little sister Emma had carved for him in art class. He placed the plastic card on the desk, noticing how his hand didn't shake despite the earthquake in his chest. "What about my finals?" he asked quietly. "I've studied all semester. Arrangements will be made for you to take them at the district office. Your transcripts will reflect the expulsion, though I won't elaborate on the specific reasons if you don't contest this decision." The ultimatum was clear: accept quietly or fight and have religious extremism stamped on his permanent record. Timothy thought of his mother, working double shifts at the hospital to help pay for his education even with the scholarship. He thought of Emma, only 12, looking up to her big brother. He thought of his father, gone 3 years now from cancer, who had made him promise to stand firm no matter what storms came. "I won't contest it," Timothy said, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to form. "But Principal Harrington, I want you to know something." She looked up from the paperwork she was already filling out, one eyebrow raised in mild annoyance. "I forgive you," he said simply, "and I'll pray for you." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a crack in the professional facade that sealed itself almost instantly. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Brennan. Security will escort you to clean out your locker. You have 15 minutes. As Timothy walked toward the door, his Bible still clutched in his hands, he turned back one more time. Victoria had already returned to her paperwork, but he noticed her hand trembling slightly as she wrote. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain began in earnest. "Principal Harrington," he said softly, "when you need help, and one day you will, remember that Grace Community Church holds services at 9 and 11 on Sundays. The doors are always open." She didn't look up. "Goodbye, Mr. Brennan." The security guard, old Walter, who had always smiled at Timothy in the mornings, walked beside him in uncomfortable silence to his locker. Students peered out from classroom doors, whispers following in his wake like ripples on water. At his locker, Timothy carefully removed his textbooks, his track team photos, and the small card that read, "Prayer changes things," that he'd taped inside the door freshman year. Melissa Crawford appeared at his elbow, tears streaming down her face. "Tim, I'm so sorry. I never meant—" "Hey," Timothy said gently, "your brother needed to hear about hope. You needed to hear it. That's never something to apologize for. But your future is in hands bigger than Principal Harrington's," Timothy finished, managing a small smile despite the ache in his chest. As Walter escorted him to the main entrance, Timothy passed the trophy case where his debate championships gleamed behind glass. 4 years of memories, achievements, friendships, all ending with a cardboard box of belongings and a security escort. Yet as he stepped into the rain, something unexpected happened. Instead of despair, he felt free, like a weight he hadn't known he was carrying had lifted. His mother, Rebecca, was already waiting in their old Honda Civic, having received the call from the office. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set with the same determination that had carried her through his father's illness and death. "Mom, Not one word of apology, Timothy David Brennan," she said firmly, pulling him into a fierce hug, despite the rain soaking them both. "Not one word. You stood for something. Your father would be so proud." They drove home in silence, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm against the storm. Timothy watched Millbrook Academy disappear in the rear mirror, not knowing that in exactly 7 days his phone would ring at 2 in the morning with a call that would change everything. The week that followed felt like walking through deep water. News of Timothy's expulsion spread through their small Connecticut town like wildfire. Some called him a hero. Others whispered about religious fanaticism. Emma faced taunts at middle school. Rebecca found her shifts at the hospital suddenly restructured, her hours cut without explanation. But the family held together, drawing strength from evening prayers and the support of their church community. Pastor Michael Davidson, a bear of a man with gentle eyes, visited on the 3rd day. "Timothy," he said, sitting at their kitchen table over Rebecca's coffee, "I've made some calls. Benedictine Prep is willing to accept you for your final semester. Full scholarship." "That's 40 miles away," Rebecca protested. "The gas alone." "Already handled," Pastor Michael smiled. "The congregation took up a collection, and old Tom Morrison offered his garage apartment. He lives 2 blocks from the school." Timothy felt tears prick his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll make us proud," Pastor Michael replied, then grew serious. "But Timothy, I need to tell you something. I got a strange call yesterday. Someone asking about our security procedures, our service times. When I asked who it was, they hung up." "Probably reporters," Rebecca suggested, but Timothy noticed the worry in her eyes. 3 days later, on Saturday evening, Timothy was helping at the church food pantry when his phone buzzed. Emma's name flashed on the screen. "Tim?" Her voice was strange, scared. "There's someone at the door. They've been knocking for 5 minutes. Mum's at work and I—" "Don't answer it," Timothy said immediately, already grabbing his keys. "Go to my room and lock the door. I'm coming home. They're saying Mum's name. They sound desperate." Timothy broke into a run, his beat-up Toyota pickup roaring to life. The 10-minute drive felt like hours. When he pulled into their driveway, he saw a figure hunched on their front porch, barely visible in the darkness. As he approached cautiously, the security light flickered on, and Timothy's heart stopped. Principal Victoria Harrington looked nothing like the composed administrator who had expelled him a week ago. Her usually perfect hair hung limp and disheveled. Her designer suit was wrinkled and torn at the shoulder, but it was her eyes that made Timothy's breath catch. Wild, terrified, darting constantly over her shoulder. "Mr. Brennan!" she gasped, and he could see she had been crying. "Timothy, please, I know I have no right, but I need—" She stopped, seeming to choke on the words. "Principal Harrington, what happened to you?" She laughed, but it was a broken sound. "Principal? I'm not principal of anything anymore. They made sure of that." She glanced behind her again, and Timothy noticed her hands were shaking violently. Can I come in? Just for a moment. Please. I have nowhere else to go." Every instinct screamed at Timothy to say no. This woman had destroyed his future, hurt his family, but something deeper, something that spoke in a still, small voice, moved him to open the door. "Emma," he called, "it's okay. Make some tea, would you?" Victoria practically collapsed onto their worn couch, and in the light of the living room, Timothy could see bruises on her wrists. Emma emerged from the hallway, eyes wide, but moved to the kitchen without question. "Start from the beginning," Timothy said quietly, sitting across from her. Victoria's story came out in fragments like pieces of broken glass. After expelling Timothy, she had received a call from someone claiming to represent an educational reform committee. They wanted to meet about implementing new policies at Millbrook, policies that would completely secularize the learning environment. She had agreed, thinking it aligned with her vision. "But when I met them," she whispered, accepting the mug of tea from Emma with trembling hands, "they weren't interested in education. They wanted to use the school. Storage, they said at first, just some boxes in the basement. When I refused, they changed." "Who were they?" Timothy asked, though something cold was already forming in his stomach. "I don't know. They had credentials, references, everything checked out, but when I said no, they told me they knew about my daughter." Timothy's eyes widened. He didn't know Victoria had a daughter. "Sophie," Victoria continued, tears flowing freely now. "She's 23, working for a non-profit in Honduras, building schools in villages. I was so proud when she chose service over corporate law." She laughed bitterly. "I pushed you out for sharing faith, while my own daughter shares it every day in those villages. The irony isn't lost on me. They threatened her. They had photos, recent ones. They knew her schedule, her routes. They said if I didn't cooperate—" She trailed off, then suddenly grabbed Timothy's arm. "I went to the police. They didn't believe me. No evidence, they said. Then I was suspended from Millbrook. Anonymous complaints about financial irregularities that don't exist. My accounts were frozen, my credit cards cancelled. My apartment. Someone broke in while I was meeting with lawyers. Nothing stolen, but everything moved slightly. Just enough to let me know they'd been there." Emma had crept closer, her young face pale with fear and fascination. Timothy put a protective arm around his sister while processing Victoria's words. "You came here because you said the church doors are always open," Victoria whispered. "Because I've spent the last 48 hours running, hiding, and I remembered the look in your eyes when you forgave me, like you meant it, like you saw something in me worth forgiving." She looked up at him with haunted eyes. "I need sanctuary." Real sanctuary. And I need to understand how you could forgive someone who hurt you so badly, because right now, that kind of grace is the only thing that doesn't feel like a lie. Timothy stood slowly, his mind racing. We need to call Pastor Michael and Mom. Emma, pack a bag. We're not staying here tonight. You believe me? Victoria asked, seeming stunned. I believe you're in trouble, Timothy said carefully. And I believe everyone deserves help when they're in trouble. That's what grace means. Within an hour, they were at Grace Community Church. Pastor Michael had opened the sanctuary without question, and Rebecca had arrived from the hospital still in her scrubs. Victoria sat in a pew, looking small and lost in the vast space she had probably never imagined entering. We have a situation, Pastor Michael said quietly, pulling Timothy and Rebecca aside. If what she's saying is true, this could be dangerous for all of us. Then we call the FBI, Rebecca said firmly. This sounds like organized crime, maybe human trafficking if they wanted storage space that badly. Mom's right, Timothy agreed, but he was watching Victoria, who had noticed the Bible on the pew beside her and picked it up with tentative fingers. But first, she needs to feel safe. She needs to understand she's not alone. What followed was one of the longest nights of Timothy's life. The FBI was called, and 2 agents arrived within hours. Apparently, Victoria's story connected to an ongoing investigation into a network using schools as waypoints for drug trafficking. While she gave her statement, Timothy sat with Emma in the church kitchen, helping prepare sandwiches for the next day's lunch program. Why are we helping her? Emma asked quietly. She hurt you. Timothy considered his answer carefully. Remember when Dad was sick and that doctor made a mistake with his medication, made him worse for a while? Emma nodded. But Dad forgave him. Said holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Principal Harrington made a mistake, a big one, but look at her now. She's drinking the poison of what those people did to her. Maybe our forgiveness can be the antidote. That's very 700-level wisdom for a 17-year-old, a voice said from the doorway. Victoria stood there, looking exhausted but somehow more peaceful. Your father taught you well. He taught me that everyone's fighting a battle we know nothing about, Timothy replied. Guess yours just became visible. The FBI agents had stationed protection at the church, and Victoria's daughter had been secured in Honduras. But Victoria refused to leave the church that night, sitting in that same pew as dawn broke through the stained glass windows. I haven't been in a church since I was 12, she admitted to Timothy as he brought her coffee. My parents divorced, and I blamed God. Easier than blaming them, I suppose. I built my whole life on the idea that faith was weakness, a crutch for people who couldn't face reality. She looked around at the sunrise painting colors across the sanctuary. But you faced my cruelty with strength. You faced loss with hope. Maybe I'm the one who couldn't face reality. Reality includes both darkness and light, Timothy said, sitting beside her. Faith just helps us remember the light when darkness seems overwhelming. The next morning was Sunday. As 9 o'clock approached, the congregation began arriving for first service. Word had somehow spread, it always did in small towns, and Timothy noticed more people than usual filing in, curious about the drama unfolding in their midst. Victoria shrank back as the pews filled, but Rebecca sat on one side of her and, surprisingly, Emma on the other. You're safe here, Emma whispered, and Victoria's eyes filled with tears. When Pastor Michael took the podium, he didn't mention the situation directly, but his sermon on the Good Samaritan felt particularly pointed. Sometimes, he said, his voice carrying across the packed sanctuary, God puts us in positions to help the very people who wounded us, not because they deserve it, but because grace isn't about deserving. Halfway through the service, during the prayer time, Victoria suddenly stood. The congregation fell silent, all eyes on the woman they knew had expelled one of their own. Timothy tensed, ready for anything. I need to say something, Victoria's voice cracked but carried. I wronged this young man. I let my prejudice and pride harm someone whose only crime was sharing hope. I came here last night not because I deserved help, but because I was desperate. And this family, this church, showed me mercy I hadn't earned." She turned to Timothy. "You asked me once if I knew what grace meant. I said it was a meaningless religious concept. I was wrong. Grace is Timothy Brennan forgiving the woman who tried to destroy his future. Grace is Rebecca Brennan making tea for the person who hurt her son. Grace is Emma Brennan holding the hand of a stranger who caused her family pain." She paused, struggling for composure. "I'm not saying I suddenly believe everything you believe, but I'm saying I want to understand. Because if faith produces the kind of strength and love I've seen in this family, then maybe I've been fighting the wrong battle all along." The silence that followed could have gone either way. Then old Walter, the security guard from Millbrook who attended Grace Community, stood up in the back row. "Welcome, Victoria," he said simply. One by one, others stood, not applauding, not making a scene, just standing in quiet acknowledgement of a moment that transcended ordinary human interaction. The next week blurred with intensity. The FBI operation, using Victoria's cooperation, successfully exposed the trafficking ring. 3 arrests were made, including a school board member who had been facilitating the network's expansion into educational institutions. Victoria was reinstated at Millbrook with full back pay, but she surprised everyone by declining. "I need time," she explained to Timothy over coffee at the small cafe near the church. "Time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to prove God doesn't exist. Your family showed me something I can't ignore, and I need to understand it." What about my expulsion?" Timothy asked, though he realized he no longer cared about returning to Millbrook. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Already reversed. Full apology issued to all colleges you applied to, explaining it was an administrative error, though I hear Benedictine Prep doesn't want to let you go now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching snow begin to fall outside, the first of the season. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said suddenly. "That day in my office when you were holding your Bible, you looked anchored. Despite everything I was doing to you, you had this peace. How?" Timothy thought about his answer carefully. "There's a verse my dad used to quote, 'We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed.' And I guess I knew that whatever you took from me, you couldn't take the thing that really mattered. Your faith, my identity," Timothy corrected gently, "which is rooted in something bigger than any principal's decision or college acceptance. You could take my position, but not my purpose." Victoria nodded slowly, then reached into her bag and pulled out something that made Timothy's breath catch. His grandmother's Bible, the one he'd been holding that day. "You left this in my office," she said, handing it to him. I've been reading it. Your grandmother's notes especially. She wrote something in the margin of Romans that I can't stop thinking about. Sometimes God allows us to be broken, so his light can shine through the cracks. I think I understand that now. Christmas came with unexpected joy. Victoria and Sophie, who had flown in from Honduras, joined the Brennan family for dinner. Sophie was everything her mother wasn't, warm, openly faithful, covered in colorful jewelry made by the children she taught. The reunion between mother and daughter was tearful and healing, years of misunderstanding beginning to mend. "You know," Sophie told Timothy as they washed dishes, "Mom called me the night she expelled you. She couldn't explain why, but she was deeply troubled. Said you reminded her of me somehow, that same stubborn insistence that faith mattered more than fitting in. She never mentioned you at school," Timothy said, surprised. "We hadn't spoken in 2 years before this week," Sophie admitted. "My choosing mission work over law school was her breaking point, but when those men threatened me, she realized what really mattered. And when your family helped her despite everything," Sophie smiled through tears. "You gave me my mother back, Timothy. That's a gift I can never repay." New Year's Eve found Timothy standing before the congregation at Grace Community, sharing his testimony at the watch night service. Victoria sat in the third row, between Rebecca and Sophie, still looking somewhat uncertain, but present nonetheless. 7 weeks ago, I thought my world was ending, Timothy said, his voice strong and clear. I thought persecution meant defeat. But God used my lowest moment to reveal his highest purpose. Principal Harrington and I were both prisoners, me to my need for achievement and acceptance, her to her need to disprove what she feared might be true. But grace broke both our chains. He looked directly at Victoria. You asked me once why I could forgive you. The truth is, I've been forgiven for so much more. Every day I fall short of who I'm called to be. Every day grace catches me. How could I not extend the same rope that's been thrown to me? As midnight approached and the congregation lit candles for the new year, Victoria found herself standing, candle in hand, singing a hymn she hadn't heard since childhood. The words came back, like muscle memory. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Timothy watched her from across the aisle, remembering the cold administrator who had shattered his plans just weeks before. That woman was gone, or perhaps more accurately, she was being transformed. Like metal in a forge, the heat and pressure had burned away the dross, revealing something precious beneath. February brought acceptance letters. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all wanting the young man whose story of faith under fire had somehow reached their admissions boards. But Timothy surprised everyone by choosing a small Christian college with an excellent philosophy program. Why? Victoria asked him. She had become a regular at Sunday services, though she still sat near the back, still observing more than participating. Because I realized something through all of this, Timothy explained. My goal isn't to gain the world's acceptance. It's to be equipped to serve. That school will prepare me for what I'm really called to do, which is, I don't know yet, Timothy admitted with a grin, but I think it might have something to do with building bridges between people who think they're enemies. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Like us. Exactly like us. On Timothy's graduation day from Benedictine Prep, the auditorium was packed. Rebecca and Emma sat in the front row, tears streaming down their faces as their boy, their young man, walked across the stage. But it was the figure in the fifth row that caught Timothy's attention, Victoria Harrington, applauding with genuine pride. After the ceremony, she approached him with an envelope. "Open it later," she said mysteriously. That evening, Timothy read her letter. Dear Timothy, 6 months ago, I tried to destroy your future because I feared what you represented. You represented a faith I had spent 30 years running from, a grace I didn't believe existed, a God I had convinced myself was either cruel or imaginary. You could have destroyed me in return when I came to you broken and desperate. Instead, you became the hands and feet of the very God I had denied. You showed me that strength doesn't come from position or power, but from knowing who you are and whose you are. I'm writing to tell you 2 things. First, I've accepted a position as principal at an inner-city school in Hartford. It's a struggling school in a forgotten neighborhood, but I want to use my second chance to make a real difference. I want to lead with the kind of grace you showed me. Second, I was baptized last Sunday. Pastor Michael didn't tell you because I asked him not to. I wanted to tell you myself. I went under that water as the woman who expelled you, and I came up as someone new. I don't understand everything yet. Faith still feels foreign on my tongue, and prayer still feels awkward. But I'm learning. Thank you for seeing past my hatred to my hurt. Thank you for offering sanctuary when I deserved judgment. Thank you for showing me that the very thing I fought against was the thing I needed most. Your journey is just beginning, Timothy, but know that it has already changed lives. Mine most of all. Whatever bridges you build in the future, Know that you've already built one that seemed impossible between a bitter agnostic and the God she had forgotten loved her. With gratitude and growing faith, Victoria. Timothy folded the letter carefully, placing it in his grandmother's Bible next to a pressed flower from his father's funeral and a photo of his family. Outside, spring was breaking through winter's grip, and he could hear Emma practicing piano through the window, a hymn, of course. She'd started taking lessons with money Victoria had quietly donated to the church's music program. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie in Honduras. "Mom just called. She's coming to visit the mission this summer. She wants to see what faith looks like with dirt under its fingernails. Thank you for giving her back to me, and more importantly, for helping her find her way back to herself." As Timothy walked to his truck, heading for his job at the Christian bookstore downtown, he passed Millbrook Academy. The building looked the same, but he knew everything had changed within those walls. The new principal, one of Victoria's recommendations, had instituted a policy of genuine religious tolerance, not the kind that silenced faith, but the kind that allowed all students to explore and express their beliefs respectfully. Melissa Crawford ran out of the building, waving him down. "Tim, did you hear? They're starting a comparative religion class next year, and they want student input on the curriculum. Will you help?" "I'll think about it," Timothy said, though he was already imagining the bridges that could be built in such a classroom. As he drove away, Timothy thought about the strange path that had led from his expulsion to this moment. He thought about Joseph telling his brothers, "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." He thought about Paul writing from prison about his chains advancing the gospel. He thought about a scared, broken woman knocking on their door in the darkness, and how God had used that moment to transform not just her life, but all of theirs. Summer arrived with unexpected news. Victoria had been selected for a prestigious Educational Leadership Award, specifically for her innovative approaches to conflict resolution and her courage in exposing the trafficking ring. She insisted Timothy and his family attend the ceremony. Standing at the podium in the Grand Hotel ballroom, Victoria looked every inch the accomplished administrator she had always been, but something was different now. A warmth in her eyes, a humility in her bearing. 6 months ago, she began her acceptance speech, I expelled a student for sharing his faith. Today I stand here because that same student taught me what faith really means. Timothy Brennan showed me that true education isn't about indoctrination or isolation from beliefs we don't share. It's about engaging with different perspectives while holding firm to our own convictions. It's about building bridges, not walls. She found Timothy in the crowd. This award belongs as much to him and his family as it does to me. They taught me that sometimes our greatest teachers come disguised as the people we try to silence. After the ceremony, as they stood on the hotel terrace overlooking the city, Victoria asked Timothy a question that had been haunting her. "Do you think your father would have forgiven me?" Timothy didn't hesitate. "He would have invited you to dinner the night you expelled me. That's who he was. That's who he taught us to be. I wish I could have met him." "You did," Timothy said softly. "Every time Emma made you tea, every time Mom sat with you during those frightening early days, every time I chose grace over revenge, you met him. His love lives on in how he taught us to love." As autumn painted Connecticut in brilliant colors, Timothy prepared to leave for college. His last Sunday at Grace Community was emotional. The congregation had watched him grow from a boy to a young man, had witnessed his trial and triumph. But it was Victoria who asked to speak during the testimony time. "This church saved my life," she said simply. "Not metaphorically, literally. When evil men threatened my daughter and destroyed my world, this church became my fortress. But more than that, it became my transformation. I learned here that faith isn't weakness. It's the ultimate strength. It's choosing love when hate would be easier. It's offering forgiveness when revenge would be justified. It's seeing the image of God in someone who's forgotten it's there, She looked at Timothy. "A year ago, I would have said religion was the opiate of the masses. Now I know the truth. It's the courage of the brave. Thank you for being brave enough to stand firm and gracious enough to help me up when I fell." The morning Timothy left for college, Victoria was there with his family to see him off. She handed him a wrapped package. "Don't open it until you get there," she instructed. Hours later, in his dorm room, Timothy unwrapped it to find a new study Bible, its leather cover embossed with his name. Inside, Victoria had written, "To Timothy, whose name means honoring God. You honored him by honoring me when I least deserved it. May this Bible guide you as you build bridges I could never have imagined. With love and gratitude, Victoria. P.S. Sophie helped me pick it out. She said you needed one with wider margins for all the notes you'll make as you change the world. One grace-filled encounter at a time." Years would pass. Timothy would become a philosophy professor, specializing in reconciliation and religious dialogue. Victoria would transform 3 failing schools into beacons of hope, always ensuring that students of all faiths, or no faith, felt valued and heard. Sophie would expand her mission to 3 countries, with her mother serving on the board of directors. But Timothy would always remember that night when his enemy knocked on his door seeking sanctuary, and how choosing grace over grievance had transformed them all. He would tell his students that sometimes the greatest adventures aren't in distant lands, but in the dangerous territory of forgiveness. The greatest battles aren't against flesh and blood, but against the temptation to return evil for evil. And sometimes, just sometimes, when we offer our enemies the very grace they denied us, we discover they were never really enemies at all. Just broken people fighting battles we knew nothing about, waiting for someone brave enough to call a ceasefire and offer them bread instead of stones, hope instead of hatred, a bridge instead of a wall. The last entry in Timothy's journal from that transformative year read simply, "Dad always said that grace was giving someone what they needed, not what they deserved. Today I understand. Principal Harrington needed sanctuary. I needed to learn that my faith was stronger than my circumstances. We both needed to discover that redemption can bloom in the most unlikely soil. Thank you, God, for using our brokenness to reveal your wholeness. Thank you for teaching us that the very people who seem to stand against us might be the ones you're preparing to stand with us. And thank you for showing us that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating our enemies, it's helping them become our family." Grace Community Church still stands in that small Connecticut town. If you visit on a Sunday morning, you might see a plaque by the door that wasn't there before. It reads, "This church is a sanctuary for all who seek truth, hope, and redemption. No one is too lost to be found, too broken to be healed, or too far gone to come home. Just ask. We have stories to prove it." And they do. The story of a boy who lost everything and gained something greater. The story of a woman who thought she had all the answers until she discovered the questions that really mattered. The story of a family that chose grace when vengeance would have been easier. The story of a church that became what churches are meant to be, hospitals for sinners, not museums for saints. But most of all, it's a story that continues to this day. Every time someone chooses forgiveness over fury, every time an enemy becomes a friend, every time grace wins, because that's what grace does. It wins by refusing to fight on the enemy's terms, choosing instead to love them into transformation. The door is still open. The light is still on. And somewhere, Timothy Brennan and Victoria Harrington are still building bridges, one act of grace at a time.